Okay, so we're going to be looking at chapter 3, and did you all recover from chapter 2 last week? Woo-wee! Okay. I know, it's a tough one, and yet it's a building block process that we're going through. And chapter 2 is an identification chapter, as well as this one is. And by identification, we mean that we're just kind of analyzing the problems so that we can prepare the solutions. So if you're finding lots of stuff that looks, whoa, that's good, okay? And what I say is the more you have, the more change you're going to see in your life as God actually removes that from your life. So don't get discouraged in the process, because people will sometimes, they'll say, but that's the whole issue, that's the whole point, that's the whole reason why we're here, is so that God can deal with those issues and give us the tools that we need to live in freedom despite some of those things that we may have in our hearts and our lives that didn't work quite the way we had hoped. This is a really popular chapter, chapter 3, because everybody comes into recovery usually because of their emotional issues. Usually the emotional pain has gotten to a place where it's like, I can't handle it anymore. Working in a drug and alcohol environment, the people that come in that are addicted to hardcore drugs, alcohol, are people that checked out at some point because they didn't know how to deal with their emotional pain. And that took them on a different pathway and had a different set of problems. Sometimes I'm working with codependent people that have a codependent base that had the substance in their life, but a lot of times I'm not. And so it's a person that has the codependent issues. They're not medicating it, at least maybe not through actual illicit drug use or alcohol. They might be doing it through prescription drugs, which I'm going to talk a little bit on tonight. But nonetheless, they're looking for ways to deal with the pain. They're looking to medicate the pain. And you know what codependence does? It tries to medicate pain. That's what it does. It's a system that we resurrect in our life to deal with pain in a dysfunctional way, not in a healthy way. And so to understand that means that there's something that is fundamentally wrong with how we're dealing with our emotions. But see, that's good news, because there is a way to deal with emotions. And what I really want to do tonight is talk about what emotions are, where they're rooted in, and how we can stabilize them. This is not a tell-all chapter that this is just going to zap you, and I wish it would, but that's not necessary. It might give you some enlightenment, but it's still another building block. And as we move into chapters 6 through 9, we're going to actually be looking at a more intense level of actual solution. So we're still identifying problems right now. Does that make sense to everyone? Because there's a very big difference between understanding what the problem is, and then understanding when we're moving towards actually dealing with a remedy for it. So let's take a better look at our emotions. Okay, negative emotions. First of all, let's talk about what emotions are. Okay? Emotions are, first of all, they're a part of us that reflects the image of God, okay? He has emotions. Therefore, emotions are part of us being made in His image, and that means they're not wrong, okay? They're not bad. They're how we were made by our Creator. The problem is that emotions can be initiated in our flesh or through the Holy Spirit. And depending on where our emotions are rooted, which we're going to spend the whole class talking about that, we're going to see the result of those emotions accordingly, okay? Emotions are never a direct source of what they reflect. In other words, we feel things, but that's not really all that's just a small part of the whole story, if that makes sense, okay? They are indicators of something else that's happening inside our heart. Negative emotions can always be traced back to a root, and this is good. This is a good thing. This is actually where our freedom will come eventually. This is where we're going to learn that we can be stabilized. This is where we're going to start to understand that we're not just bound and we're not just powerless to the feelings that we feel in a given situation or in a given time. What I want to spend some time right now I want to make sure that you can see that. I want to spend some time showing you a little bit of a breakdown of our inner human, actually our outer and our inner human being. And now I don't want to make this too Psychology 101, but it's really important. I don't have this in a book. When I do a reprint, I'm actually considering adding this because I think it's really foundational. We are a three-part being. We have a body, a soul, and a spirit, okay? Now our physical body, we understand that because we can see that. And we can have physical issues, and we go see a physical doctor, and that sort of kind of makes sense. Now, we live in a culture that has turned pretty much most emotional issues into a physical problem, okay? Now, I'm not saying they can't be, and the brain can have imbalances. We actually work with a psychiatrist who understands that, and we don't want to discount that or negate that. But we live in a culture right now that's basically diminishing the soul and the spirit, which we're going to be talking about, and saying it's all physical. It's all physical. The physical body is important if it's imbalanced, if something's not right. But where really the culprit is in our lives lies in our soul and our spirit. And really this process, that's what we're doing. We're looking at the soul and we're looking at the spirit. The soul is our mind, our emotions, and our will. That basically, in simple terms, that's how we think, how we feel, and how we behave, okay? In a real basic way. There's some important things to know about those three areas in our life, and one of the really important things to know about our thought life is that our thought life is a voluntary process. And what that means is we have physical body processes that are involuntary, like breathing. You just automatically do it. You don't have to think to breathe, okay? In the same manner, our soul, the thoughts in our soul are based on a voluntary system. That means that we do get to choose what we think. Does that make sense? Okay. Our feelings, however, are different. They're more like an involuntary. We can't change the way we feel just by saying, I'm not going to be mad. I'm not going to be sad. I'm not going to be hurt. I just refuse to feel that way. Or someone says, why are you feeling that way? And you can't figure it out. It's like, well, stop feeling that way. And you can't, okay? Because it's involuntary. It's involuntary. But here's the thing with emotions. Emotions aren't just out there. They're not just random. We're not just powerless to them. They're connected to a source of information. And that connection is through our thoughts. Okay, and I'm going to be talking, our thoughts are connected to something as well. Now, how we think and feel affects what we do. Very simple, practical way is we know that a chair is to sit on. We know a doorknob is to open. We go through these processes all the time. Now, those don't have a lot of feelings attached to them, okay? But when you get into the more complex things in life, they do have feelings attached to them. You'll never amount to anything. If you believe that thought, that has a feeling attached to it. So really, when we look at behaviors, we're looking at the outworking of this whole other system that's happened first. That's why we say in treatment, it's so important that people understand whether they're on the good side of the relationship and they're doing everything good, or they're on the lousy, rotten, awful side of the relationship and they've done everything bad. In either case, you're not what you do. What you do and who you are and what's going on are two separate things. Because what we do has a reason. Something's connected to it. And believe it or not, we're living in a spiritual realm, and everything that we think is initiated, I believe this, in the spiritual realm. Okay? Now, maybe not some of the practical things like sitting on the chair, is maybe not a big spiritual process. But when you get into the deeper stuff in life, it's definitely affected. And we're going to look at that a little bit tonight. Because our spirit is at the core of who we are. We are spirit vessels. We are created in the image of God. That is who we are. And then we have a soul and a body. But our primary identity is our spirit life, if that makes sense. When we are not a Christian, if we do not know the Lord, our spirit life is cut off. And most of us in here probably understand that concept. It's one of those basic things we learn in Christianity. Our spirit life is cut off. So we're only functioning with our soul and with our body. Okay? Just those two things are at play, and we're spiritually dead. Okay? We become a believer, and we have spirit life. What does that mean? In very simple terms, it means we're connected to God at a very basic level. What that really means, though, is that we have the ability to understand and perceive of spiritual things. We can not just read the Bible, but we can actually start to comprehend it. We have the ability to see and comprehend who God is. It's the connection. It's a direct connection to God. It's the difference between life and death. We understand that sometimes in an eternal sense, but it works immediately. Because this is what's going on. In our spirit life, we're connected to God. We're either broken by two things. We're either broken by sin, or we're broken by the Spirit. And what do I mean by that? Okay? When we're living under the power of shame and guilt and condemnation, even if we're a child of God, we're living under the power of sin, and that breaks us in a very awful way. It causes us to live a life usually of deep bondage, affliction, pain, suffering, all those sort of things. That is a form of being broken. But when we really come to a point where we truly are willing to give our spirit life over to God, to allow Him to reign and rule in our lives, we're broken by the Spirit in an altogether different way. And we usually use that word, if anyone's in the 12-step program, step 1 is a step of powerlessness, which I'm going to be referring to today. And when we are broken by the Spirit, we get to a point where we say, I cannot do this. I cannot do this. Take over. And then what happens is the Spirit of God begins to dominate our lives. Now, how important is this? It's very important. It's very, very important because we have two different systems at play in our life at all times. This isn't in your book. Okay. We have a battleground really going on. And if you've read Joyce Meyer's book on this, and there's other good books out there, there's a battle going on in our life. And we have an actual enemy, okay, who has a systematic army in place, and he has devices that he set up to sabotage the human mind. Okay, I know that might be kind of hard to really think of, and it's hard for us to visualize it, but that's what's taking place right now, even in this room. That's what's taking place. I'm not saying he's physically present or anything like that, but he's got a whole system at play. The whole world system is part of his system, okay, what our culture says. And so his system is driven by guilt, fear, and shame, the principles of death and destruction, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are the result of those lies. What happens as a result? We're held in bondage, captivity as a result of that, okay? Some of you, if you've had a conversion experience, if you know what it's like to be totally without God, and then you come to God and you experience that, we can think that that's just the end of the thing. Okay, I'm there, I've arrived, now I'm a new believer, this battle should be over, and it's not. It's not over. In fact, it's just beginning. In fact, when we weren't a Christian, he wasn't even bothering us as much other than to try to keep us from being one. Okay? So the real battle starts happening when we become a believer who actually authentically wants to learn to walk with God. God's kingdom, on the other hand, is a truth-based system. It's driven by love, grace, and redemption. God's system is built on the principles of life and restoration. As truth prevails, God takes ownership of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And I'm going to be sharing this in more detail. It's important to know that when the Spirit of God starts to work, this might not make sense right now, but bear with me, that we don't just have to be driven by our emotions. We can make decisions in our will, not based on what we feel, but based on the truth of what God says. Okay? And he will ask us to do that. And it's hard sometimes, especially if we've been emotionally driven and we've learned to live our lives believing that our emotions dictate our reality and dictate how we think and how we feel and then thus how we act. It can be difficult to understand that when we start to operate by God's system, he will align our emotions at some point in the game, but sometimes in the heat of the battle, we might be asked to do things and we don't really feel that good about it, okay? Let's take a look at the next screen. Lies versus truth. Okay. Here is the real battlefield. The two things that are taking place, and I just want to show you really in a nutshell. This is in a nutshell the whole process that we'll be doing. So you don't have to worry if you get this down perfectly right now tonight. We're going to be dismantling this and looking at this in a variety of ways throughout the next however many weeks we have left together. This is basically how it happens. I'm going to go through that chart and go through the process of what happens. When we are living a life in bondage, this means we're not free. Get this, you can be in bondage and be a child of God. I just want you guys to understand that. It's not a free ticket to instantly remove everything in our life that's ever been broken. It is not. We have to work out things in our life and allow God to work things out in our life so we can be in bondage and be children of God. Because this is why. When we are in bondage, we are bound to the lies to the point they have become our truth. This is the definition of a stronghold. It's when we believe a lie and that lie becomes our truth. I believed a lot of lies growing up. I believed that I wasn't good enough. I believed that I was ugly. I believed that nobody liked me. I believed that no matter how much I tried, I was stupid. I mean, I could go on and on and on. There were tons of lies in my life. And you know what? I believed them. Because what we believe, the words of others, and it can be our own family members that impose them on us, or Satan as truth, or live through another person, feed off their emotions, what happens? We think unhealthy thoughts. Our belief systems dictate and mandate our thought life. So what we think causes us to feel negative emotions, which we turn into our facts. We turn our feelings into our facts. What happens as a result of that? Well, in codependence, one of the dysfunctional, now people deal with their issues in all different ways. Okay, we're just talking about one pathway. I keep referring to the addict because there's probably people in this room that are dealing with that. There's a really good chance. Okay, and that's a pathway to take. That's a pathway to take. But we typically learn to deal with our emotional issues by becoming emotionally dishonest with ourselves and others. We're going to look at this in chapter 6. When we start to look at repression, we start to look at the ways that we deny. We, therefore, as this whole thing progresses, begin to live in negative behavioral patterns, okay? Negative behavioral patterns. And you know what happens as a result? We form an entire system, and our entire identity becomes toxic. This is the enemy's. You know, we get spooked out sometimes talking about the enemy. But we have an enemy. And this is his agenda in our life. Because if you know the Lord, but you're under this, you're useless to God's kingdom. And I don't mean you really are useless. Okay, but when he has you under that, you know, actually, and we're going to look at, I don't even have words to describe how marvelous redemption is when you've been on that side. And some of you maybe have tasted of it. Some of you are hungry for it. We have a powerful God. We have a powerful God. We just don't know him. We just haven't experienced him. This is what recovery is really about. It's bringing our spirit to a place of surrender and submission where the truth and light allows us to believe God's truth no matter how we feel. We're going to be doing a process of truth finding throughout this entire workbook. And you know what? Sometimes the truth is going to break your heart. Sometimes the truth, you're going to want to run away from it as fast as you can run away from it. You're going to want to hide under whatever you can hide under, okay? But I will tell you, that truth is your redeeming grace if you let God work it out in your heart. Because God's truth, it's not just the truth, it's God's word. But what he does is he works out truth in two ways. First, he takes truth, he exposes what's actually going on inside us. That's part of our truth. Sometimes we think that the truth is just some Bible verses, and that's the truth. That is the truth. That's God's word. But the truth is also what's going on inside us in light of who God says we are and in light of what his principles and promise dictate and mandate in our life. That's actually truth. Sometimes we don't get that part, especially when we learn how to put on a facade and we learn how to stuff those feelings inside and we learn that, you know what, I don't really need to deal with this, so I'm just going to pretend like life's okay when it's really not okay. Okay, God wants to break that in us. He actually needs to break that in us if he's going to set us free. And one of the biggest acts of mercy, the biggest act of mercy in my life is being broken by the truth of who I really was and what was really going on in my life. And you know, God was gracious and gentle. He showed me my faults. He showed me my hang-ups, but he also showed me what broke me. And he will do that for you. He's not just going to go, you're this and you're that and this, that. He's going to show you how you even wound up there in the first place. Because you know what? He's got a compassionate heart. And he saw the whole picture of your life. He was there through every single phase of your life. So he doesn't just look at you behavioral. We think that God is just after our behavior. He is so not. He is so not after. He is after our heart. He wants our heart. And what does our heart mean? It means that that whole system is dominated by him. Our beliefs are dominated by him. Our thoughts are dominated by him. Our feelings are put in their proper perspective. And then we're living a life based on that reality. Because you know what? We can be doing a bunch of good stuff out here. And we got nothing going on in here that really matches up with it. And are we trying to be deceitful? Normally not. It's just a coping mechanism. So how does this work? Well, when we start to believe that and let God expose truth, and we start to believe who he is, and we start to believe his truth, no matter how we feel, we start to think as he thinks. We get the mind of Christ. I know we've heard that a lot, but when we really, really get the mind of Christ, we start to hear what he actually wants to say about us. You're my precious child. I love you. Don't listen to that. That was a lie. I would never say that about you. Okay? We start to feel authentically. That doesn't mean that those feelings are going to go away. Let me just warn you. I had pretty much no feelings the 3 years prior to God breaking me. I had shut down in such a way that I hadn't cried. I started to self-medicate through alcohol. I had all kinds of other things going on in my life. But when God really got to me, I felt and I felt and I felt, and I was, people thought I lost my mind because I cried like all the time, okay? God got me in touch with my feelings. He didn't take them away. I started to experience joy, but I started to feel a whole lot of other feelings too. God doesn't just want to just remove those feelings from you right away. He's going to let you face them. He wants you to feel them. And he wants you to teach you. He wants to teach you a better way to cope and to deal with those feelings. Okay? What happens as we feel authentically and not irrationally allowing feelings to dominate us? We start to become emotionally honest with ourselves and others. First, it's going to start with yourself, but you know what? It's going to trickle out automatically into other people. Recovery is really an environment that is meant to allow us to be emotionally authentic and honest. That is a gift. I hope you can utilize that gift because it's a gift. We sometimes can't do that just sitting in a big mob of people or sitting in a big church where we don't necessarily feel safe or feel like, you know, I remember going to churches back in the beginning. I mean, this was in a whole different part of the country and everything, different culture and everything. But like I would be crying in church and you know, and people would be like, what is wrong with her, you know? And like, you know, I kind of was getting like shooed away. And, then the few people that would come up to me and talk to me, because I just had a total revelation of just what a broken person I was. And prior to that, I was walking around and, I had my act together. And so, what happened to you? And then I'm trying to explain what happened to you. Well, the Lord He just showed me. He showed me what was really going on in my heart. They just had absolutely disconnect. So that didn't make them bad. It's just that they didn't understand because that wasn't their experience. And so that's, sometimes you're emotionally honest and people aren't going to get it. So finding a group like this where you can find people who are going to understand it is such a gift. It's such a blessing. It really is. What happens then, we start to live out the will of God by choosing to believe and follow God's truth. Now let me tell you, this is a process. You don't start living it out tomorrow. Okay? I know. In the typical codependent, as soon as they see one thing wrong, I got to fix it. I got to fix it, okay? And you'll just go, you know what I said? It's equivalent to, I have a 3 and a 4-year-old that run around my house. So, I spent a day of house cleaning, and next thing you know, what? There's a bunch of stuff all over the house. And you know what? I had to learn with 3 and 4-year-olds that I just got to learn to live with the mess sometimes. It's not going to be perfect, and I got to be cool with that. And we're going to have to learn that in recovery. We're going to have to learn that we're going to have to live inside some of our dysfunction as God exposes to us, and it's not going to go away right away, and that's okay. It doesn't have to go away right away. That's the job of grace. Grace says, it's okay. I just expose that to you so you can start to deal with it. You don't have to get rid of that right away. And you know what? You can't even get rid of it. I'm going to get rid of it. Okay? He's going to bring you through a process. We also want the results right away. We're like the microwave fast food culture, okay? So just zip me through a process and boom, boom, boom. Come out to the other side and I'm good as new. And I've seen people have varying different levels of breakthroughs. And God might touch your heart. He did touch my heart very profoundly in one season of my life. And it was just radical. I mean, radical. And I've seen that. But not everyone's that way. And you don't have to be that way. But this is what he wants to do. He wants to change that entire system so that your core identity aligns with who you really are. If you could only see God's heart towards you, and if you, maybe some of you have, but if you haven't, you are his precious creation. I'm not saying a bunch of fluffy words. I mean, he foreordained a purpose in your life. He created you. He formed you in your mother's womb. He placed your DNA. He pre-programmed the plan that he had for you. But you know what? Sometimes we're not in touch with that person of a God because we're viewing him through our circumstances. And he wants to break our circumstances down. He wants to break all that dysfunctional stuff and all those lies and all the things that happen that he never purposed for those things to happen, but they happen because we live in a broken world. And you know what you're going to find underneath? You're going to find who you really are. And I guarantee you it's going to be precious and it's going to be good because God, everything God makes is good, right? Okay. So we're going to go into some of the actual emotions that we discussed in this chapter. And I just wanted to give you that basic structure. That's kind of what my husband and I, that's our basic body, soul, and spirit. That's our basic process that we use in all facets of what we teach and what everything. And what's interesting about that is God taught us that separately, completely separately. When we came together, we had, wow, it was cool because we had really understood it the same way. And you know, I'm not here to teach you theology. I really am not. And this is what I would suggest, is that you bring everything to the Lord. And the Bible tells us to do that. You bring everything before him and ask him to give you the peace and ask him to give you the understanding and the clarity. And he will do that. It's just amazing sometimes how he brings confirmation to us when he's trying to teach us something. He'll just give us a devotional that day. He'll give us a Bible. He'll give us a message at church, whatever it might be. Let's look at anger. Anger is very, very prevalent in the codependent, okay? Let's just say. There's two different people that I normally work with coming into either the workshops or getting counseling help. One is blatantly angry, and one is like, everything's fine. I don't have any anger issues. Everything's fine. Praise the Lord. But the reality is that I have never met a person that didn't have anger issues. Okay, never. Because this is what the very definition of anger is. It's actually a defensive emotion that arises when we feel our personal boundaries have somehow been violated. Anger is an attempt to preserve our sense of personal worth, essential needs, and basic convictions. Hello. Okay? Codependence, I mean, that's what's happening at a core level, is all that's being violated. At least in our own perception of that, all of that's being violated. So obviously, unless we have the tools to deal with it in a healthy way, we're going to have anger in our lives. What's the most important thing to understand about anger is a secondary emotion. It's a secondary emotion, and that means that anger is always driven by another emotion. I can fear something, and that makes me angry. I can feel rejection, and that makes me angry. So when we're working with, we do some anger management and some things of that nature. And when we're working with someone with a really deep anger issue, we're actually looking at anger as only the manifestation of that problem. Okay? That's how it's playing out. There's something much deeper going on that's driving that. Most people who suffer from codependence experience a lot of anger. And why is that? Because often we're the ones trying to balance a relationship that's imbalanced. We're often feeling violated. We're often feeling used. And even if we don't express it and we're like, everything's fine, it's not. Okay? Let's look at some of the other emotions. One of the big ones is rejection. And I would say that this is one of the bigger emotions that's at the root, because rejection becomes a core identity issue. We can have a rejection root in our life where it becomes so predominant that it's no longer something we're just feeling occasionally. It becomes our whole entire idea of who we are is just rejection. So it's very toxic and it's very poisoning. Oftentimes the root of rejection happens early in life. If we don't have loving, bonding parents, and we don't want to throw mom and dad under the bus every week, because most of us are parents too, and we don't want to have to be thrown under the bus. But you know what? There is a cause and effect, and we just need to understand that. And if we're going to blame someone, I always say we got to go all the way back to the garden. I probably told you this already, and I'll say it again. And we got to really actually blame Adam and Eve, because it's their fault. Because our parents had parents, and our parents' parents had parents, and so on and so forth. But it still is what it is. And we can say, oh, it wasn't that bad. Oh, it didn't really affect me that much. Oh, you know what? I just started acting like this at, I don't know when, just at some point. But that's a lie. That's not true. If it was formed in our childhood, it was formed in our childhood, and we need to see it. We just need to see it so that we can just start to deal with it in a healthy way. It's not that we have to blame anyone, but we just want to look at it and see it for what it is. And those wounds that happen in childhood, when our hearts are so young and tender, when you're a little child, you don't have coping mechanisms. Okay? You don't know how to cope yet. And so when trauma takes place, when rejection takes place at that point in our life, we're super vulnerable to what that imposes onto us as we become older. A sense of rejection can lead to anger, where we focus more on the person that rejected us rather than accept that a person found us unworthy. Okay, here's the deal. Rejection is just the core sense that for some reason you're not accepting me. It's the opposite of acceptance. So when we start to sense in situations that we're being rejected, basically what we start to do is we can start to focus on that person and go, well, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong with them. That's one way we can do it. The other way we can deal with it is that we become a people pleaser, and we go, okay, well, that person's thinking that of me. They're rejecting me here. Now, how can I fix that? And how can I overcome that? And then we become people pleasers, and then we try to make ourselves crazy by trying to please someone so that they'll accept us. Okay, that's normally the two different avenues that we can go. So coping with rejection, this is really a process. This is giving you a little preview, but this is not something that you just need to learn and get, and it's okay, I'm done, I'm good now. I'll never have to deal with rejection. We're just starting this process. But let me just give you a little preview. Coping with rejection. What would be a proper way to cope with rejection? Well, first of all, we need to learn to identify what's real, what is projection, and when am I living on the basis of facts versus feelings, okay? That's the first thing we want to do is identify. This is in your workbook, I think, directly. Then we want to process through it. And what process through? It's like a computer processes information. We're just like stewing on it. We're just thinking about it, okay? And so in the processing of that, we want to face it for what it is, understand whether my failure or whether it's my failure or if it's someone else's failure, okay? When we are feeling a rejection towards us, is it based on reality? Is it true? And if it is true, is it really something we did or is it something that they just got going on in their own life? These are really important things that we need to look at. At some point, we just need to let go. Just stop getting that compulsive need to overcome it. And that might be focusing on better friendships, work on behaviors only if they were real. In other words, if we're being rejected because we have something not appropriate happening in our life and someone is turned off by it, then we got to deal with that because that's a problem. And we can fix that. But if we're being rejected for no real true reason, and maybe it's not just a perception, maybe it's not even reality, because that happens a lot, and then maybe it's that person, they have an issue in their own heart. We just need to learn to let that go. We ultimately, everything we're going to do through this process is we're going to learn to take the lies and replace them with truth. And whatever emotion we're feeling, that's what we're going to basically doing. And I'll tell you, with a root of rejection, I had a very deep root of rejection that piled up in so many ways. And so all the key relationships in my life, everywhere I went, from school to home to church, everything kept speaking that rejection message over my life. And it took some work. It really took some work to work through that. But you do not need approval from people to get over your root of rejection. You do not. You only need the approval of our Lord. Actually, when God was dealing with this root in my life, he was dealing with it in the midst of a lot of rejection. Actually, it was like total rejection because everyone thought I lost my mind when I really came to the Lord and really experienced like what happened to her because it was so different. Okay, so that's really the rejection. The acceptance that we find in the Lord is our that's our victory. I want to talk to you about fear. I want to talk to you real quickly about fear. Fear is paralyzing. Fear is a crippling emotion. It's not just what it causes you to do, it's what it causes you to not do. Fear takes your life away from you. I had a diagnosis at one point in my life of anxiety disorder and panic disorder. I was a terrified human being, terrified. I could not walk into a room without shaking and freaking out. I could not go grocery shopping at one point in my life without almost being on the stage of a meltdown. Modern day would have said you have a problem, you need to medicate it. I never did go that route. For whatever, the rebel in me just refused to. But the fear was so crippling, it was so paralyzing. I couldn't do anything other than where I knew I wouldn't fail. Okay? I didn't try anything. I was like a prisoner in my own life. Fear is actually a love problem. It's actually a love problem. When we have fear, when we have instability, when we are afraid all the time, it's because we don't understand the love of our Creator. That's really what it is. I know that could sound like just a pat answer, but the emotions of fear will paralyze and stifle any personal growth or aspirations. Perfect love casts out fear. The victory we're going to find is not getting self-confident and going to a self-esteem class. God actually wants you to have really healthy self-esteem. But if we take the approach of just trying to be super, super good at something or super successful, okay, that's not the remedy. The remedy of that is to find the faithfulness of a loving God. I can't exactly explain how that happened, how I moved, but I can tell you something. I do not operate by fear anymore. There was a transition that took place in my life, a stabilizing reality that the love of God truly was sufficient. And I remember going through a period of my life when that fear had left and that peace had taken over. And I still live in that peace, and it's incomprehensible, having been at that level of fear. Fear can drive other emotions such as rejection or anger. Fear can only be overcome through faith in a loving God. Okay, I think I said that. Loneliness. I kind of got to go through this a little quickly now. Loneliness is a lack of connection, which is the direct nature of codependence. Can I tell you that? That's what codependence is. It's a lack of connection. Usually we feel an inward void. Loneliness can be experienced in the presence of others when we have the inability to feel authentically known and understood at a heart level. Again, that's why recovery is awesome, because you have other people who are going through this with you. But that's not always the case. And you know what? Sometimes God will still allow us to kind of feel that way while we're going through recovery, just to teach us to depend on Him, and the sufficiency of His grace really is sufficient. Children that experience neglect or lack of love will go through life with loneliness. Life is filled with loneliness. Part of it is going to be acceptance. Sometimes we're just going to have to deal with just, life can just sometimes be lonely. This side of the world it can be, if that makes sense. But here's what we can do. We can learn to convert loneliness into alone time with God. Okay? And that is another stabilizing reality. The love of God takes away fear, but the connection to God takes away loneliness. Okay? Powerlessness. It's present when we feel violated or unable to change our circumstances. Powerlessness is the recognition of our inability to control the outcome. We have a hard time with this, guys, because we've been trying to control outcomes usually. So most codependents struggle with powerless by attempting to fix, manage, and control in indirect ways. In fact, that is the insanity of codependence, okay? This is why as step one, an admission of powerless is so critical. It's simply saying, I can't, I can't, I can't, I can't. Your powerlessness might be a negative when you're trying to make your negative situation positive on your own, but your powerlessness is the first process that's necessary for you to turn to and surrender to a faithful God, because step 3 puts God on the throne and gives us power through Him. This is the key of the journey of any form of authentic recovery. God is in control. Okay, God is in control takes away that fear as well. Takes away that fear. Codependents are obsessively control-oriented. I just don't have any way to sugarcoat that, you guys. Okay? And there's reasons for that, though. It's not just, we're just bad people. There's reasons for that. And we're going to continue to look at that. In fact, we're going to devote a whole chapter to that, to really understand that. But recognition of those tendencies is a major breakthrough. Just being able to start recognizing that. But I'll tell you what, those control issues that we have, they will not die fast. Okay? Not going to go away tomorrow. That's one of those things that it's like some of the stuff laying around your house that you just kind of got to be like, well, it doesn't have to be perfect. Well, that's one area. It's God's going to keep working on it, but we're not going to be perfectly functioning in that area. Shame and guilt, and I just really quickly want to go through this. Shame says something's wrong with me. The codependent has a core shame identity in most cases. And what does a shame identity mean? Something's wrong with me. At some level, there's something very defective about who I am. I'm not normal. Something's not right with me. Guilt says I've done something wrong or didn't do something that I should have done. Those are two of the prime driving influences in our life in codependence. Most codependents are driven by guilt and decision-making and efforts to accommodate and please the artificial, usually they are artificial needs of others. When we experience guilt and shame, we can try to overcome it by being good. That's normally what we do in codependence. We go, I feel that way, so I'm going to try to put a bunch of good stuff on top of it, and that's going to take it away. We can also rebel against it, and that's kind of what the addict does. Oh, yeah? I'll show you what I think about that, okay? They act all crazy and do all kinds of crazy stuff. We can hide from it and ignore it, and this is denial. And denial brings us into other places, too, and that's why we're going to spend a lot of time talking about denial. There's only one cure. We're going to be looking at it really in chapters 6 through 9, we're going to be dealing with the cure for that, so you're going to have to hang on for that. But what I want to do is close up with 5, I think it's 5 steps to removing emotional strongholds, and I'm just going to cover these. These are in your book, towards the end of the chapter, Removing Emotional Strongholds. You had a chart there that helped you to understand, believe, think, feel, and act. So if you didn't quite understand that graph that I was doing, or if you're still trying to, what did that mean? And for those of you that didn't, if you by any chance didn't read the material yet, there's a chart in there that's going to be helpful to help you understand that a little bit more. We have to remember that emotions are indicators, not facts, okay? Emotion is like the engine light going off in your car that says you need to change the oil, okay? It's just indicating something. Okay? In the heat of the battle, we must not allow our emotions to dictate the actual reality. This is where we are most vulnerable to wanting to medicate, and medicate can be our codependence in some form. We need to identify belief systems that drove the emotions. At the end of this chapter, you're going through a process where you're going to start to learn how to put this together. At first, it can be kind of maddening, it can be kind of difficult, but where you're going to actually try to see the link in your own life between your beliefs, your thinking, your feeling, and your behavior. And if you just start to try to capture your thoughts, that's the first step. They also call this something in the secular world, okay? It's called cognitive therapy. Serious. I got cognitive therapy before I was a Christian. And he had me going through and writing all these things about myself. And you know what? Actually, there was nothing wrong with that. I had some weird stuff that I was thinking during the week, boy. I was like, wow, I can't believe all this. And when you start to capture your thoughts, but what can you do with it then? What do you do with it in a secular? Okay, now what? It's not true? What, am I supposed to pat myself on the back? It's okay, Stephanie, you'll be fine. There's nowhere to go with it. Okay, so we want to identify the belief systems that drove the emotions. We are capable of doing this without God's help. In broken places, we need to learn to call out to God and ask Him to show us what is going on inside our heart. I constantly live in this reality. My emotions have stabilized in my life, but I've gone through being a new parent in the last 5 years, being married in the last 6 years. I've experienced a lot of new emotions. And I constantly have to get in touch with them, especially if they go in the negative way. What is going on, Lord? If there's anger in my heart, what is going on? And He is so faithful to that. He is so faithful to that. He will always point it right in the direction it needs to go. And that's the place of freedom. If we can just learn to stop and we can just learn to humbly bow before Him and go, what? What is going on? He will point it out to us. We need to identify where we transfer responsibility. Most often we blame or look to someone else as the source or initiation of our pain. No, you guys don't do that, right? In recovery, we need to ask God to search and show us our part. This empowers us to find solution rather than be held captive to our circumstances. You know what? You don't want it to be somebody else, because if it's somebody else and you have no control over it, you have no freedom. If you're bound to someone else emotionally, and we are in codependence, a lot of times we're enmeshed emotionally. What they feel, we feel. What they think, we think. But see, that's the bondage, and that's what God wants to break, because you want your feelings to be your feelings, and you want to learn to feel them, and you want to learn them, identify them, and not transfer them, because that's how God can set you free. We need to recognize Satan's part. We have an enemy. We have a real enemy. And he works through people just like God works through people. And it's cunning. And it's people we know. And it's not even like, they have, horns on them or anything, okay? Sometimes it's just the brokenness of the human heart. Claim God's promises. All our freedom will be found in God's truth. But that is not just in a Bible verse. It's in receiving truth at a core level where it becomes a part of who we are. God doesn't just want you to read Bible verses outwardly. He wants to put those verses and write them on your heart where they become an actual reality in your life, and you know that your God is who He says He is, and you are who He says you are. Okay? Let's close out in prayer.
I come to you, for I know you satisfy I am